Hey guys, it's Abby, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how you can make this dress. Now this has so many elements that you can mix and match into other sewing projects that you're doing. It's working with a knit fabric for the skirt, it's working with a woven fabric for the top, and I've used shirring to make it more elastic. And I've also done adjustable straps, and I'll be showing you how I do my adjustable straps in a more in-depth tutorial than I normally do. So there's so much you can take away from this project and take into other sewing things that you're doing. You don't need a whole lot of fabric for the top, and for the skirt you need less than half a metre of fabric. So there's a whole world of possibilities that you can do with leftovers in your fabric stock. Without further ado, let's get going. So the inspiration from this design came from this gorgeous rose printed fabric. Now I've literally had this fabric since the year I got my sewing machine. But as you can see, there's actually not a lot of this fabric. So in my mind, I really wanted to save it. I want to use this fabric when I know how to sew good. Compared to me now, where I just want to declutter my fabric supply. So I did my best to make the use of this fabric by turning it into a shirred top. So shirring is a technique of applying stretch to your fabric by replacing your bobbin thread with an elastic instead. You then sew multiple lines straight across your fabric so that the elastic is embedded in your material. And by the time you've done several lines, you should basically have a stretchy panel of clothing. And you typically do this with a non-stretchy fabric, such as the one I'm using here. So to get this going, I'm going to go ahead and cut out my straps using the bottom of this fabric, and then I'll hem both the top and bottom and start the shirring process. So the dimensions of the fabric I had were about 14 inches wide by about 16 inches wide. So if you like to work in the metric system, that is about 1.5 meters in terms of from selvage, and you can see that the width of the fabric I have is approximately about 35 centimeters wide. And so here I am cutting off 2-inch strips from the bottom of the fabric so that I can make the straps later. Here you can see me with the shortened piece of fabric, and the next thing to do is simply to hem one side of the fabric. If you were making a top, you would hem both sides, but because we're making a dress, we only actually need to hem one side. Whichever side you hem, you can fold over the fabric twice and sew the hem with a straight stitch. I have to admit, the whole time I was sewing this top, I was quite concerned that I wouldn't have enough fabric to make a decent length of top, and so I was trying to be extra conservative with how much I hemmed, so I'd have the maximum amount of fabric so that I could do the shirring. However, I discovered that by the time I'd done enough rows of shirring, actually you only really need about 9 inches of fabric plus the hemming allowance to make a nicely shirred top that is like a reasonable length over the bust. So, you know, if you only have a little bit of fabric, bear that in mind. This is what my finished hem looked like, and you can tell I only folded it over once, and to be honest, I was pretty happy with the result. The next step in this process is to wind your bobbin with the elastic thread. Now you need to wind your bobbin by hand without stretching the elastic as you're going along. This is to ensure that there's the right tension with your elastic when it's being sewn. After you've loaded your bobbin like you normally would, you should definitely test out if your machine just runs. And I found that my machine would work for a couple of stitches, and then like the bobbin would kind of just like pop out of the bobbin case, as you can see here. And that was because there was an issue with my machine's tension. Tension is what is used to make sure that your stitches come out evenly, and with my machine the tension automatically sets itself, but with other machines you may have to manually change the tension. I ended up having to go back to a manual setting on my tension, and I had to make the tension increasingly positive. So my advice is to play around with your machine's tension and essentially make it as positive as possible, and then decrease it till the point where it's still sewing fine without giving you any weird kind of problems. You can see here that as I am doing each row, instead of cutting the thread off at the end of each row, I'm actually lifting up my presser foot and then moving my fabric about 1 inch at the end of the row, then putting my presser foot back into the fabric and then continuing sewing. This just means that I don't have to keep cutting the thread or do anything to the two ends of thread each time I do a row. I just kind of keep continuing. They say go hard or go home, so as soon as I had done a few practice rows, I went ahead and started on my main fabric. You can also see that as I'm working on the main fabric, I haven't drawn parallel lines to show where I should sew. Now, if you want your project to be 100% neat, then I recommend getting an erasable marker, something that washes away with water, and drawing out lines about 1/2 inch apart to represent where you need to sew down. I just decided to eyeball it, and at the start I was like, this is quite messy, maybe I should have drawn some lines, but by the time I'd done enough rows, you couldn't really see it was that uneven, especially if you were looking at a distance, and so I was pretty happy to kind of go a bit rough and ready on this project and just eyeball things. So after a couple of rows of doing the shearing, I just didn't really feel like my elastic was really gathering at all, and I was starting to lose hope that I would get the effect that I wanted. However, I discovered the secret to getting really nice and tight gathers, and it just takes the chance of doing a few rows of stitching and then using your iron. The steam from your iron causes the elastic in the bottom to gather up, and then you have really nice tight gathers. After this, it was full steam ahead, no pun intended, of just doing row after row after row of shearing. So eventually, this is what I ended up with. So this is many lines. I've not yet ironed this, but even if I just wrap it around myself, I'm pretty sure that when it is ironed, it's going to cling in all the right places. So I think I've done enough lines of stitching. I'm pretty happy with the length. I'm going to go ahead and fold it right sides together and to sew along the back seam. And then I will make the skirt, sew the skirt seams and attach the skirt. Because we have essentially made our non-woven fabric now stretchy, we are going to use a zigzag stitch. And I use an elongated zigzag stitch with quite a thin width just to do my side seam with a seam allowance of about 1/2 inch. Now let's get on to making the skirt. For the skirt, I use this black ribbed jersey fabric. So this fabric already has some natural stretch, and in fact, it's the same fabric I used for my DIY little black dress tutorial, which you can find here. So you want to go ahead and lay your fabric out on the fold. Here you can see me adjusting the fabric to try and get these stripes to line up along both sides. I'm putting my fabric on fold just so I can cut both the front and back pieces at the same time. You should then go ahead and lay out a pencil skirt. Here you can see me using the cactus pencil skirt I made the other day. I will be uploading a tutorial for this skirt and the matching top sometime soon, but right now I'm just using it as a template for my jersey stretch skirt. Now, because we're using a stretch fabric for the skirt, there is zero need to add any seam allowance, so you can go ahead and trace your skirt exactly. Here you can see me applying pins to my fabric, which is already right sides together, and that just means I have one less step when sewing, because once I've cut it out I can literally take it to the machine, do the side seams and then hem the bottom. As this is a stretch skirt, we want to use a zigzag stitch. Once I sewed the side seams on both sides, I went ahead and hemmed my fabric by folding over the fabric once. I used a straight stitch to hem my fabric too. So as you can tell, making the skirt is super easy and it's a lot quicker than actually making the top. So the next thing you do is just decide where you want to crop your top. Because I'd done the kind of roughly the exact length of stitching, I didn't really need to crop my top so much. I decided not to cut off my excess fabric though, just because I was a little bit like, but what if I change my mind afterwards? You can't take fabric back once you cut it off. And here you can see me putting in pins to position where I want these straps for my top to go. There is actually no need to add straps because the fact that it is self-adjusting in terms of how tight it is around your body means that it will stay up no matter what your chest size. So you don't have to worry about your chest size not being big enough to hold things up, and conversely you don't need to worry about your chest size being too large such that things spill out. I'm kind of more of a strap person, so I ended up making straps and I made them adjustable because adjustable straps are always better than normal straps. To make my straps, I took my 2-inch piece of fabric that I cut out earlier and I folded it in half and used an iron to really get that crease nicely into my fabric. After this, I opened up my folded strip and I folded each half in on itself so that all the raw edges were hidden. I then sewed a straight stitch down the entire strap length. Adjustable straps are composed of 2 main pieces. You have the bit at the top, which essentially connects the top and bottom straps together, and you have this bracket bit at the bottom, which just goes onto your front strap. Now these 2 pieces here are basically equivalent. I actually designed the one on the left because I wanted a decorative feature in this component of my adjustable straps, but you could as well just use something like a simple circle as is shown on the right. Here you can see me designing the decorative piece along with the adjustable buckle, and I 3D printed these and I had a rose design because I wanted it to match my rose printed fabric. Next step for me was to put my adjustable straps in place. So what you can see me doing now is taking a piece of my strap and literally pinning it to where I think these straps should go. The first piece of strap I cut was probably about 12 inches long, and this was quite an arbitrary measurement. There was no real justification for this. I then took the remainder of the strap I had and cut that into a small piece, and that would form my back piece, while the longer pieces form the front piece. I take my back strap piece and I take the back strap and I thread it through and fold the back strap in half. I then pin this back strap piece into place. I do this with the other side as well, as you can see here. Next, I take one of my front straps and I thread it through my buckle, going in and then out. I then take this front strap and I thread it through my decorative piece, and then I thread it through the buckle one more time in the same direction that I threaded it through the first time. Once I've done this, I then want to take the inner 2 pieces and make sure that they kiss and sew them down. This is what that area looks like when it's been sewn down. Once you've done that second strap, take your top piece and then flip it inside out and keep your skirt right sides out. You're then going to put your skirt into your top so that they are both right sides together, and then you want to make sure that your skirt is evenly pinned around the bottom of your top. In an ideal world, you would cut off all the excess fabric. For some reason, I was still just slightly concerned that I might somehow cut off too much fabric and then the whole project would be ruined, so I kept on my excess fabric. This meant that I had to make sure that I measured where the skirt came up to on the side without a side seam, just to make sure that the top was sewn like an equidistance all around the skirt. It's also useful to take pins to mark the middle of the skirt and the quarter of the skirt, and do the same thing with the quarter of the top and the middle of the top. And this is great because one of these 2 might need to be stretched in order to fit around the diameter of the other one. So if you match up all these kind of quarterly marking pins, you can make sure that you are stretching your fabric the right amount between where each pin is located. Use a zigzag stitch to do this C, and then we're so close to the end. All that's left to do is to sew our straps into place, and I would recommend using a zigzag stitch there also. For that really tight area where you've made the straps kiss next to the buckle, it's easier to hand sew it normally than it is to use a machine, but you can use a machine. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and if you do end up making this dress, please let me know in the comments down below. Please send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to see what you guys get up to based off of this tutorial, and if there's anything you'd like to see me make in the future, just drop it down in the comments below. Like and subscribe for new videos every other Friday. Have a great week.